Hello, you are watching episode 46 of Women of the Future. Today we will be looking at a very curious subject entitled the Crone. If this is something that you haven't ordinarily thought of, do not feel alone. This is something new to me as well. And Sister Denise, who is in the studio with me, will enlighten us further. Sister Denise, it's great having you back. Thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you.
The Crone. Sister Denise, that is an odd title. What does it mean?
Well, the word crone refers to the wise elderly women or woman. And the stage that you reach as a crone, and crone is close to the word chronos, which means time, it means death. And so that is the woman who actually almost decides her own time of death. So she's almost transcended death, and she has transcended her femininity, where femininity, it keeps her in a sort of secondary condition in the society. So the elder woman, the very, very aged woman, is very much like the wisdom keeper, the holder of the experience and the history of the community. So she's a very, very valuable figure. And actually, one of the problems we have in the modern world is people really don't like old ladies.
Yeah, Sister Denise, I must say in most of the societies that I have encountered, older women are regarded as being a burden on practically every level. You have younger family members who are ashamed to have such a person in their midst.
But you see, the children adore the grandmother, the great-grandmother, because that person brings magic into the life of the child where everybody else is taking the magic out. So there's a very special relationship between the very, very ancient, regal, magisterial, older woman, and of course she would have had to deal with this attitude. So the crone is a woman who has actually established for herself a powerful position in the society, and she can say whatever she wants to the men, and they have to listen to her, you see. So the position of a crone is a very important one in the social fabric.
Sister Denise, I recently read an article that said that people are dying at a later age now than ever before. A much later age, so which means that the world is seeing far more 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds, 100-year-olds, etc. As far as the women of the future are concerned, how do we draw on this resource, and where do you find one if there isn't one in your immediate midst?
Well, first of all, I think that the much later age of leaving the body is an indicator of the future, which means that our health care and our longevity is such that it means we don't have to go through our life periods quite so quickly, and we can enjoy our childhood, youth, maturity, etc. longer. Our working life maybe longer also, and it affords us an opportunity to really think about the very long journey of life. I mean, people say, may you have a long life, but when a person is old, they're also frail and very often unwell. And so what you often hear old people say to the younger ones is, don't get old. It's not so good. So maybe it's a double-edged sword in one way, but I think that if we're really looking after our health, our nutrition, exercise, our thought, our minds, the quality of the later years will be much better in the future than they have been. And I think that it's something really to explore, because it's really, traditionally even, it's in the really later years that you really come into your own in terms of your spirituality. And the very old person is kind of positioned in between the worldly world and the world beyond.
Why is it the case that there is a direct correlation between age and spirituality? What is behind that?
You know, there are certain times in life when certain things are required of you. So traditionally it's said that you're not really mature enough to deal with your spirituality until much later in life. So, for example, in Kabbalah, the Jewish mystic tradition, they say that you shouldn't really start it until the age of 40. And there's a lot of good reason for that, because if you're immature, you don't have what it takes to really go to the depth of your being. And I think that a person needs to develop psychologically and then spiritually. So people who start...
Okay, hold on. I want to stop right there. Someone has to develop psychologically and then spiritually.
Yes.
Okay, that is a door which you simply cannot close and move on. Tell us more about that. I have not heard it put that way before, and I'm sure the viewer hasn't either. And Sister Denise, the reason that struck me is there are a lot of people who attempt to develop themselves spiritually without sorting out the psychological damage. Hundreds, thousands.
You could say damage or lack of development. Of course there's lots, but it doesn't matter. Even if you decide, okay, I'm going to follow a path of spirituality from the age of 20, you'll hit a wall which will be, okay, you can't go any further until you've sorted out your psychological stuff, and then come back and talk to us, you know.
My goodness,
you have to do that.
It is such a pity that that's not advertised more, because a lot of people then are going against their own grain by trying to do the opposite.
Well, if there's lack of understanding about this, obviously it's going to make your spiritual development a lot more difficult, but you have to have common sense that enough to realize that the spiritual part is very deep, is very rich, and is out of range of the inexperienced person. And the thing that makes you experienced as a person is to work through your psychological issues, because it's about your immaturity, you know. And if you have some psychological damage, some trauma or whatever, it injures the spirit, and so you have to work through it. And then when you really get into the depth of spirituality, do it when you're, you know, capable of it. So anyone who starts their spiritual life young, they will have to either in parallel or in just stop their spiritual development and catch up psychologically and then get on with it.
Okay, Sister Denise, the part of the problem with our society is that we associate both men and women of an older age with being decrepit, infirm, grumpy, etc., with negative behavioral traits, which some of them may have or may not have. So that sits deep with people, these prejudices.
In a way, there's good reason, because if you're in a society, which we are in, which doesn't give greatest importance to the spiritual development and the psychological development, then by the time you're old, you're definitely not wise, you're just old.
Yes, so then...
So the wisdom has to come from making the aim of your life something much more spiritual than just get lots of money, big house, lots of children. That's quite materialistic, quite shallow. But life, human life, is really about achieving depth and wisdom. And so a person who moves through the stages of life with the appropriate degree of spiritual, psychological work, by the time they're in their 70s, 80s, 90s, they're rich, they're mature, they're beautiful, they're something that you really want to have around, and they will have figured out how to manage an aging and maybe infirm body.
Life is about acquiring depth and wisdom. That's quite beautiful. But, Sister Denise, what you just said before that about how people tend to, want to acquire the house, the spouse, and the kids, that is the aim of many, rather than the other aspect of acquiring depth and wisdom. There are very few who decide in their 20s or 30s, I want to be spiritually more deeper and wiser than I am the previous decade. And what you just described takes decades of work, doesn't it? So how does one then make this transition from having a superficial attitude towards life and acquiring a deeper one, a richer one that will serve you and others when you reach 70, 80 and 90? How do you make that transition if you're predisposed towards the house, the kids and the spouse?
Well, you might not be predisposed. You might be disposed by your environment, because everything about our materialistic society says house, spouse, kids, boat, TV, whatnot and so forth, holidays, that's life. Are you having fun yet? That's the question they ask. And it's very superficial, it's very shallow, and it's a 20th century thing. But I remember one time I had gone to Bolivia, and in the Andes Mountains, very, very high up. And we were just going to see the mountains, and we were walking along a little track. And there was a young boy, he can't have been more than about 13 or 14. And he was just sitting there in this huge expanse of mountainous, empty terrain, watching a few llamas. And he had his flute, and so we talked to him. And this was his day, sitting at very high altitude, being with nature. And of course, what happens to a person in that environment is they develop their inner world. And what happens in our society is you just try sitting and looking out of a window and somebody will say, what are you doing? You're supposed to be active in something, and they give them these electronic devices so that the soul is totally pulled out of the inner world and is totally on the outside. And so this is what we need to really rebalance. Sometimes people think that if you have a life of simplicity, then you are underprivileged. But there's a great inner wealth that arises when you have a simple life. You have enough, but you're not cluttered with all of this pull to the outside. You remember this phrase, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. There it is, and it actually robs a person of their depth. So by the time they're old, they're empty.
Okay, so Sister Denise, the question that pops into my mind is, how do we get to be a crone, a geriatric octogenarian that we're proud to be? How do you get there?
I think it's very much about seeing the whole long journey of life and making your life work, your character.
Making your life work, your character. That sounds like an artist with an unlimited canvas.
It's very much so, and yourself is the most important thing. Yourself means the inner dimension, and you know, as you go through life, you learn about interaction with people, with things, money, goodness, badness, pain, betrayal, all the different things that make you experienced as a person, and you working on cultivating your virtues, your powers, and by the time you've reached 80 or 90, you're a treasure, you know. And
that's lovely, to be a treasure.
so that means you're very aware of your value. And because you are doing this and you're extending your love and your care to the younger generation, it's very natural for them to take care of your physical needs as you get older. And it's a very beautiful symbiosis. But the person who grows without taking care of the younger generation, there is no karmic account with the younger generation, so you get kind of left out, left behind and put away somewhere because you didn't create that account of give and take with the younger generation.
You used an expression that is very lovely, to grow to become someone that you're proud of and somebody who's aware of their value.
Yes.
I really like that, to be aware of their value. You obviously cannot be aware of your value when you're 80 if you've not made the effort when you're 20, 30 and 40.
Well, absolutely.
Okay, so how does one become aware of one's value? I take it that once you're aware of it, then you're able to spread this awareness to others. How does one get there, Sister Denise, in light of the fact that we all have to face our demons from time to time?
Well, take the comparison of the garden outside our house here.
Yes, I can even feel the breeze.
This garden was planted more than 100 years ago. And so when you first plant a garden, there's little trees, not that many flowers, they all look small, and it hasn't acquired that character. And you know, as the garden reaches 100 years old, it has the maturity, the, I don't know, the quality of having been through so many seasons, different kinds of weather, some very harsh weather, sometimes big storms, and all of it shapes the garden. And I think a person's life is also like a garden. There are weeds you have to get rid of. There are beautiful flowers that you want to cultivate, and as you cultivate yourself, you read, you've been through the historical process, you are a mine of stories, you are a mine of understanding of what the human life is all about and what relationships are all about. And so you just keep bringing to the table depth and breadth and huge tapestry of your experience, and that you can only do if you are cultivating yourself all the way through, from your teenage, through your work time, your education time, your family time, your mature time, your grandmother, your great-grandmother stage. You are a very rich resource for the world.
How does one connect with someone who's falling into the definition of a crone, that you're not biologically related to, but you want to draw from that person's wisdom? How does one go about doing that? Because there are people in our midst who have a lot to offer. I mean, you've seen examples within the Brahmakumaris.
Definitely.
So how do you access that without the foundation of a relationship?
I think, you know, one of the specialities of the crone is she's there, and anyone can come. She's absolutely accessible. She doesn't have any duties, responsibilities. She's there. So you come along, you talk. You don't need any reason or any arrangements or any special introductions. You just come and say, can I talk?
Okay, so just go out there and do it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's as simple as that. You have met many Crones within the Brahma Kumaris. How have they enriched your life?
Many ways, actually, and the crone, the older woman, not just only within the Brahma Kumaris, but in many different settings of the world. These are women who carry their own treasure, you see. Of course, within the Brahma Kumaris, you have women who have the story of the beginning of the Brahma Kumaris, the wonder of how everything started, how they set it up, how they were absolute pioneers in so many areas. And so they talk about, you know, the magic of those early days, because when you're in very creative time, it feels also very magical. And then, you know, there's a lot of experience about how things work, how life works, and what works and what doesn't work, you see. And so the older women are very happy to talk about it. In Europe, those who are at the age of the crone at this time, they went through the Second World War.
Yeah.
And so they have a lot to say about what that experience was. People who went through the Depression, people who went through a lot of changes in the status of women, what it was like when you had no rights at all, how you got your rights, how you used it. All of these things, it's like a living historical museum, you can say. So it's a very, very rich presence to have in your life. And I think that, you know, when in some communities they bring children to the older people who get stuck away in homes, and the children actually reactivate the elder people. So there's a very important relationship between the little kids and the old men and women. And the other thing that also works really well is animals. Because in our society, the elderly are sort of, you know, just sitting with nothing. You know, if you've got a cat or a dog, you know, that animal is going to kind of help you to live your life a little bit better quality than if you're just by yourself sitting waiting for your death. A lot of people are in that condition.
Okay, Sister Denise, there are Crones watching you right now who have done the work on themselves, but not really appreciated, and who do not know how to impart their value back to society, and who do not know how to share what they've learned because they're not convinced that anyone's interested in what they have to say. What is your message to them?
Well, I think probably the elder women who are listening to this program would say, oh my goodness, it's talking about us.
That's
because
great.
elder women are not generally the topic.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so, you know, welcome to those of our elder sisters who are with us, and know that you are very important, and, you know, offer your stories, start being entertaining, and this will also give you extra dimension of life.
In what way?
It activates, it animates the soul. You know, otherwise you just kind of go quiet, and you get deactivated easily. You know, the elders really need stimulation. And so bring the kids to the elders. That's a really, really good thing to do. Adopt a grandmother.
Adopt a grandmother. That is so lovely. And that's a lovely note on which to end today's talk. Adopt a grandmother. There you go. So Sister Denise has taken us on a journey that we would not ordinarily embark upon. It is actually quite lovely to look at an area of society that has been, to a large extent, marginalized because of their age, and simply because we do not know and are not really taught as to how to engage with older women. And I do not just mean your biological family, I mean women within your community, men and women within your community that are 60, 70, 80, 90 plus. So we now have had a half an hour with Sister Denise where she has shared how we can engage with such individuals and also draw upon their wisdom and enrich our own lives. A lovely topic, Sister Denise, very, very lovely, and a very humane way of looking at humanity, isn't it? That's what I like most about it. It's very kind. Yes. So thank you for joining us, and I do hope that you are able to connect with a crone or crones within your community. Thank you so much for your half an hour, and I will see you again soon. Take care. Thank you, Sister Denise. Take care. Goodbye.